Welcome again, my friend. It's been great talking to you
Thanks,
last time, and now you're back again.
Back again. Thank you for hosting me. At this stage, I feel like a resident guest, but it's all due to your generosity, Dr. T. So thank you for having
I'm
me.
not sure if we can move it to a resident guest. You're almost going to be recruited to be an official co-host, but upon availability, because I know your schedule is super tight.
Yeah, it's busy.
At the same
But
time,
we had a chat just before, and you said, when you're busy and your schedule is packed and you're living at the outer edge of your potential, it's good.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
sometimes more is good.
Right. We've got Leong with us today. Leong, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So can you tell us, what do you do? I know that we've got so you're generally now in Australia, right? Is that how you call it here?
I think Esquire is a bit more in the States. We just call ourselves solicitors.
Solicitors, right? Okay, but it's more in the same level, right?
Yeah,
same as you.
Yes,
Leong?
just recently got admitted as well.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. That's great.
Thank you. It was a whole lot of money.
That's good. I'm glad to be talking to powerhouses like you guys. You got the wealth of knowledge that you can give me, even in terms of the legal aspect of things, So you're working together or different companies?
Different companies, kind of like similar things that we undertake.
Mm-hmm.
So I work in personal injuries, particularly in workers' compensation, for the applicant side. So if there's injured workers that need assistance, they come to our firm and we assist them from start to finish.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this one thing I love about talking to you is that there's always that room to chat about a lot of things. And I'm not sure really how prepared even myself I am to sort of take a bite on too many things. Since the last time, it has been a lot of things that happened, or are still happening in the world, right? I think the last time we had a chat, we were still more focused on the Russia and Ukraine kind of conflicts.
Absolutely.
In addition to the many, things we spoke about Mastermind Alliance. But I mean, now we've got new problems, too many different kind of problems. We've got Sydney stabbings. We've got...
and rest in peace to all the people who passed away in the stabbings.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw that, not just in Sydney, but also Melbourne, about yesterday or day before yesterday, there was a stabbing in one of the shopping centers there, if you paid attention to the news.
I did. And, it's not just across, the East Coast. Even in the outback and other parts of Australia, there's a rampant increase in crime, petty crime, violent crime. And, I was comfortable with the sentiments of the New South Wales police. They said they're going to get down to the bottom. Obviously, they found the perpetrator, but they're going to go over and above to investigate if it's a mental health issue, which is good.
Which one are you referring to now?
The ones in Bondi.
The Bondi one?
Yeah.
But the Bondi one, it was confirmed that he's got mental health issues. They even had an interview. The media got access to the father, and they had an interview with him.
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned, though, and maybe this is where we could sort of start pushing even more deeper. The police official, seemed to have said things that were not so much plausible, at least judging from social media responses, right? At one case, because Sydney had two different stabbings. One is the one in Bondi Junction, and then the other one is the one in the church.
Yes, that's right.
The Orthodox Church.
Yes.
And it seemed as if the police sort of hesitated giving more information. And I mean, perhaps it's also smart not to jump the gun and say things, but for me, I would have been pleased to see the police sort of coming out and condemning any kind of, insights, violent insights that were happening on social media. So, for instance, many people thought that the stabbing in Bondi was from someone who's from, the Arabic locations, right?
Yeah.
But then with time, rumors spread on that actually he was not Arabic. He's actually of a Jewish lineage, you know, and a certain name was sort of released on social media and pictures, and people said, but this does not look like the person who was, who's the perpetrator in the Bondi stabbing. But the police were quiet about that, which for me I was a little bit concerned whether were they also trying to sort of move carefully as to not to harshly oppose the ideas that if this person was from an Islamic faith or whatever, therefore this could have ideation in it, so it could be branded as terrorism.
Yes.
But if this person comes from a Jewish faith, and because speculations were saying that the stabbing was taking place in a Jewish location, therefore the speculations take a different turn.
Absolutely.
But that's not the case for me. The case comes now when we see the stabbing of the priest Mary Emanuel in the Orthodox Church. How quickly then the information that indeed this was ideations was actually released even by the police as opposed to the first one in Bondi. Right?
Yes.
So perhaps that's what I want to sort of speak about in terms of how quickly we are to sort of brand things. And I mean, obviously all these things happens in the wake of the Israel and Palestine conflict and how people have sort of come guns blazing on social media to take certain sides, I'm for this one and I'm not for that one. And very often even the patronage is in relation to other external forces. For instance, the fact that some people are now, approaching American politics with high approval, and how they try to sort of dominate the narratives all around, try to get sides, getting people to sort of hate Putin in Russia and love Ukraine, getting people to hate Palestine and Hamas.
Sure.
And love Israel, Sure. So I guess the point I'm trying to make with it is that there has been inconsistencies. Perhaps you can lay it out. Why did you think that the police official and the way in which the police have actually handled this is in a plausible way?
I think that's an important insight that you've raised. Just with regards to profiling, the matter is actually before the court as we speak. There was an issue of defamation. And for criminal matters, the standard is proving beyond reasonable doubt that the person who's being accused actually committed the offense. In this case, committed the murders of the deceased people in Bondi.
Yeah.
And, it goes back to what you said. A lot's happening in the world with regards to race, with regards to the conflicts in the Middle East, and even here. And tensions are high, so people perhaps might jump the gun and assume that every attack might have a terrorist element to it, which is untrue. I like what the person who was accused of the crime went on to say. He said, unfortunately, the police haven't done their job, and it's caused me a lot of pain and emotional suffering. But mistakes do happen, and with the fullness of time, he'll be vindicated.
And I mean, one of the things that I wanted to sort of echo in today's conversation has to do with Elon Musk. If we can bring Elon Musk within the very same context of the Sydney stabbing and whatnot, right? Now, Australia is sort of pursuing him to sort of abide by the e-safety laws of Australia, asking him to remove all, this violent stuff online. And Elon is refusing. He's sort of trying to push the American thing about pro-free speech and whatnot. But Australia obviously is a different ground, in terms of it, even though we know that Australia tries to sort of mimic a lot of things happening in America and also in the UK. But it seemed like this is sort of taking a different direction. Maybe you can weigh in for us there. What do you think about our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, basically? No,
Anthony
Albanese. I'm still in the past. Right. But Albo basically saying Elon is out of touch and he has to sort of respect the laws of Australia. And whether do you think in the long run, this kind of an attitude of having to sort of bully platforms that aim at promoting free speech, will it help us in the future? And isn't this sort of another aspect of censorship which Elon was actually trying to combat when he took over formerly Twitter, now X? What do you think about that?
Well, I would like to begin by saying that in Australia, freedom of speech doesn't actually exist. It's only implied, and it's only implied in the context of political communication as well. So I think people need to be able to compartmentalize American laws and Australian laws. Like what I see usually is that people merge the two, but they are quite different. But in terms of the approach, it is quite complex because I think internet is very hard to regulate. Despite censorship, laws in the past being imposed, I don't think it's something that's really easy to achieve, because like you have people from different jurisdictions on the internet as well. So that's what I would impart.
Right. And Eddie?
True. I'll just echo what Leong said. It's definitely difficult to compatibilize American laws, Australian laws, or even laws from the United Kingdom, because, you know, different jurisdictions perhaps have different legislations. And what I've noticed is these legislations change in real time. They're always being amended, repealed, or, you know, going for a referendum in some cases. And, you know, such a huge ambit like the internet space is almost impossible to regulate at this stage. You know, in the future, they might have certain metrics to ensure that these people who perpetrate crimes online are brought to book, or freedom of speech is given a bigger platform to grow and flourish. But at this point in time, you can't really fault Elon Musk for trying to expand his platform. Ultimately, it's a business decision. It's a decision that's founded upon growing his market share and his influence, not just in the Asia-Pacific space, but around the world. And obviously, their egos are going to rub. It brings me back to the point of masculinity as well. When two strong personalities, extroverted personalities go head-to-head, ultimately there will be some friction. And that's what we see with the Prime Minister and arguably the richest man in the world. So it should be interesting to see moving forward, and I just hope cooler heads will prevail.
I mean, there's a number of things that you're sort of saying for me there, and I wish for this to be more of a conversation.
Of course.
Short now, right? It is within his right. He's making a business decision and whatnot. And I'm thinking a couple of years ago, when we look at, is it Cambridge Analytica? I don't know if you remember the scandal about Cambridge Analytica, when they go through, you know, so the whole production of the big hack. I can't remember if it's a Netflix production or not, which looks at, you know, the role of Facebook, you know, in, you know, influencing people's opinions, right? And how certain lawyers and human rights activists came in the UK and said, but this is sort of tarnishing the whole aspect of democracy. Because there's sort of disinformation, and people are sort of made to really think that, you know, Brexit is the right approach. You know, Britain wasn't really doing nothing in the alliance, where else that's actually not true about things. So when you think about it as this being part of, you know, a business model, Elon is within his right. I'm kind of conflicted in the same way, because I think Australia also is within its right to sort of protect itself, and not so long ago, I saw Trevor Noah speaking about, you know, being in support of the whole idea that America wants to sort of ban TikTok, and speaking about that as a matter of national security and so on and so forth. And I'm thinking, yeah, sure, you're right about that. But Cambridge Analytica gave us a case that we can work on in terms of how we strengthen our laws and what should be viewed in our own territories. China does the same thing, not allowing any other certain platforms within their spaces, and we can criticize them as socialists, Marxists, or whatever the case, but at the end of the day, they are making their own conscious decision about their own territory, right? TikTok, Shao Chung, the CEO, who is actually from Singapore, I think, but you see the senator trying to sort of align him a lot with China, because America wants to sort of be in this fight with China, and the whole claims about how TikTok is a threat to sort of American security. I'm thinking to myself, but why shouldn't we also say Albor is within his own rights to sort of make that strong, tough decision in the context of Australia to say, well, if America is able to sort of ban TikTok, which I think the projection is somewhere around September, therefore Australia is within, you know, her own right. Australia is within her own right to say, well, we also want only this aspect of our information to be leaked out, especially because also, Leong, you've mentioned that free speech is not sort of something which is there by a legislature, but it's sort of implied, so to say, right? To me, it seems like obviously there could be other external politics within this, but at the same time, there's still the intention to sort of protect your own citizens around this.
Sure. And I think you raised a good point in saying that ultimately it's the responsibility of the Prime Minister and the people in charge to protect the sovereignty of the citizens. And if that means going as far as wide as to regulating how they use their social media, so be it. But that comes with several implications. Obviously, human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, which is enshrined in the Constitution. And it will definitely have a lot of pushback, particularly amongst the youth, the younger people, the Gen Zs, people who are making their income and their way of living off social media, perhaps will feel affronted that, you know, their livelihood has been taken away. But, you know, I'd be interested to see how it would put Australia's position geopolitically if they go ahead and ban TikTok. You know, that they have ambitions to be, or X, they have ambitions to be a mid-power and to be part of the G8 in the next 5 to 10 years. And, you know, Prime Minister Albanese has made it clear that they're going to ramp up with regards to economic output. You can see what's happening with the visa migration issues. They're ensuring that only skilled migrants come, settle, get permanent residency and eventually citizenship in Australia. And this is geared towards being a huge economic power. But the world is changing. People are leveraging AI to have, you know, financial outcomes. So for them, I think it'll be a shot in the foot. But I'd be interested to see.
I'd actually love to hear what Leong has to say about it, because I think that's my initial question. Like, if we ban it right now and we give it that hard restriction, what can we say we foresee? You know, especially with the role of social media platforms, how they're sort of becoming more important now. Yeah. And this is not to say I'm much more of a fan of what Elon is doing. Yes, I think he attempts to do better than the other people who were there, but I think instead I see more of a shift from, you know, the radical left towards now the shift towards the radical, right. For me, I see, you know, same difference basically. I wouldn't really say what he's doing is 100% plausible. I don't know whether that's the same thing, but feel free to weigh in. But what could we foresee in terms of this kind of, you know, behavior right now, the way in which Australia is pushing?
Just considering Australia's fundamental principles of like politics, you see that they try to uphold democracy and liberal principles as well. And in doing so, sometimes it's not easy for them to mutually be exclusive. Yep. So just piggybacking off what Eddie was saying before about how there is obviously a responsibility for Anthony Albanese to consider the views of Australia as a whole from like a democratic point of view. There is also that entitlement, us as civilians, to also go ahead and have our own choices. So that's another thing that within government, we always are contradicting. There's the majority view and then there's the liberal view. So it's like...
But that's the thing. He said, sorry for cutting you, he said Elon is out of touch with reality of what the Australian people want. And my question was, how do you know what the Australian people want? Because it's not like there was a voting into this where you can tell me that majority of the people were say, okay, let's exercise then this so-called democracy, right? So, and again, then I remain with the question that his kind of pushback is not him politicking again in a way that he's trying to also please his opponents who are actually now taking, you know, the whole idea of migration, as you said earlier on, you know, in a different spin that I think is actually challenging his popularity in the Australian politics. So how does he know exactly that most of Australians do not want to see that archival aspect of the stabbing in the Orthodox Church?
I honestly think in saying that as well, I think it's problematic that it is a bit divided, the political sphere. You will see that there are the boomers and then there's Gen Z, who both have differing views. And so it's sometimes I'll see things in the media and it's almost as if they are assuming the democratic point of view of Australians, but it's just the baby boomers perspective, which is vastly different. If we were to consider from the Gen Z and moving forward the signs afterwards, the generations afterwards, it would be reasonable to foresee that we will be moving towards a more liberal, people are looking towards capitalizing, monetizing from social media. So there's no way that they can determine that Australia as a majority would be not wanting that. The trajectory of the way we are going, not just in Australia, but just generally, globally speaking, social media is something that is unchanged and it's going to continue to like, I guess, flourish.
So we do need to allow space for Elon to function freely, or we still need to sort of create barriers for him and say, maybe not here. This is the extent you can
I
go.
think Australia has an opportunity to like establish some boundaries now. If they were looking at regulating anything, it would have to happen early on before we open up the floodgates. That's a term that we use in law.
What does that mean to open up the floodgate?
I think it speaks for itself, really. 0 to 100 in more colloquial terms. But, you know, just piggybacking off what she said, there's no freedom without responsible action.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to really deregulate the platform and people want to post what they want, it leaves yourself open to attacks. I don't know if you guys use X from time to time.
Yes,
but
absolutely. Banter is unmatched on there.
You know, there's no leash, there's no political correctness. People are free to be themselves.
Yeah, but that's the thing, and I think, which is why I said I think Elon tried to fix things, but again, the more things also become worse. But it's a shift of the one angle of the words to another angle of the words, because what I see now also in relation to the whole videos that are being posted, disinformation and whatnot, is that I'm not really sure whether I looked at the policy in Australia. The fact that people can make money even in terms of, you know, how you post and how people respond to you. I see that a lot with the South African version of Twitter, right? Where people can say a whole lot of stupid things and get a following and disinformation and whatnot, just they can make their few extra cents from Elon. That itself also is problematic according to me. Because yes, we're moving from a point where Elon is a big giant, is making money for himself, his business and whatsoever, but also trying to create this kind of models of people saying I'm an entrepreneur, but all I'm doing is dishing disinformation on X and I'm making money out of it. Yeah. It's still problematic at the end of the day.
It is.
For me.
I think another thing with, like, because I use X quite frequently as well, with the proliferation of AI, there are people that purposely do spread misinformation and disinformation. And it's like there is now a function where underneath a post it will say, this is incorrect, like this was generated by AI. So I think that's like the barriers he's tried to put in place in correcting. Like I don't know who's there.
Still not accurate.
Still.
I have to pay attention to that. Because I responded to somebody not so long ago. They posted a picture about, I think, something in the States. Or finally, the trans narrative are going to fall, something like that, right? And because, you know, different states now, especially those who are like pro-Trump, you know, they're trying to sort of ban a whole lot of things that were brought in by the radical left, right? The progressive. So they're trying to sort of ban all those, like your critical race theory, your gender reassignment, and so on and so forth. They're banning all those ones in different states, like which Florida is actually one of the most radical ones. Right. And Florida pushes the fact that we're doing away with critical race theory, but we have to teach the curriculum that says slavery wasn't that bad. At least it taught people a certain skill that they can use going forward, right? So my point is that they, in the post about trans narratives about a fall, they posted different pictures of trans people, but again in that picture there was, you know, Caster Semenya was a South African athlete. Caster Semenya is not trans. No, it's just a woman with temperament, right? And then, but I was like, but okay, so where is Elon's corrective whatever in this case? Because he's not sort of bringing that to correct the fact that, look, here there's a case. And I mean, Caster had a whole lot of case with the, you know, global whatever sports fraternity, which that information could have actually even been captured there to say she's still undergoing a lot of court cases to prove that she's actually not trans. She's, you know, a woman, but who's within the LGBT, so to say. Yeah. So I'm still not having 100% confidence. The disinformation, I think, but yes, I believe that he can do more improvement. But he is cocky himself.
Oh yeah.
Right. So how do you even correct him if he's like that? You know.
I don't know. There's a famous song from Kanye West. I think it's relevant. It says no one man should have all that power. And, you know, it also goes back to philosophical things. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Elon Musk, you know, bought out the platform at the back end of the pandemic as a lucrative business venture. People were back at home. So he saw it as a way to have at least a bit of a stake in the communications industry. But the problem with having such broad discretionary powers, especially on a platform like X, you don't know who's lurking in the back posting them. People hide behind facades, fake profiles, trolls, parody accounts, and it's almost impossible to police them. In fact, there's parody accounts that are actually perpetrating crime, recruiting children into child slavery, child pornography, on the basis of you don't know who's on the other side. And these people approach gullible, impressionable teenagers or younger people and put themselves in a position to extract information from them, which hitherto they wouldn't have. So as much as Elon perhaps could have approached it in a different way, we also have to look at it from the perspective of it's almost impossible to police the entire platform. And putting more stringent measures in place is a first step, but it's not the full gamut of what he needs to do if he really wants to eradicate all of this negative things on the platform and make it what it should be, a global village for people to share ideas and connect with their friends.
I mean, some people would associate him with a staunch masculine guy. You've been sort of flagging the word masculinity for a bit to sort of tap into it.
That's the topic for today.
Somebody who's sort of precise in speech, exercising their strength, the fact that he's not flinching at all. Australia's been taking him into court cases and whatsoever. But, I want to sort of spread this thing much more beyond. You're looking at Elon's nature, not easily moved, very precise in his decision. That can be attributed to people like Trump, who's very precise in speech. And many people would say, well, this is a typical example or an embodiment of the alpha male, whereas all the others are sort of kind of like betas, so to say, right? So I want to sort of stretch this more further. If we can talk about, those very same qualities, perhaps maybe if we can start about masculinity in itself.
Yeah.
What's our version or our conception of of masculinity, so to say, and do we believe in just a simple concept of masculinity or masculinities? I think in this social sciences and in psychology, there's been more spread into masculinities. The fact that we don't really have one version of masculinity, and within the so-called concept of toxic masculinity in itself, there's actually men who are also victims of toxic masculinity, but of which many people, including the feminist scholarship, is not sort of casting more of their eyes into those ideas. I don't know if Leong, you are a feminist or not.
I think Leong should actually answer this question.
You are a feminist?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yes. Maybe if we can start from you.
I don't think it's reasonable for me to comment on this, though.
It is.
I don't think I can conceptualize masculinity, but I think there certainly is a westernized version. So like being the diaspora, I see both. Like I see what traditional masculinity would be in Sudan. And then I see what traditional masculinity is in Australia as well. Like I grew up with predominantly like white people. So it does vary like a lot. I think in this current day and age, femininity has kind of crept in a little bit. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with it. But
crept in,
into
what? Into
masculinity.
Australia's version of masculinity,
yes.
or just masculinity in general?
Masculinity in general, but in definitely.
What way? Yeah, can you take us through the specifics in that?
I would say this is very problematic, but I think there has been a shift in what we consider to be femininity and what masculinity is. So we've almost swapped a few of like the characteristics per se. So for example, I see a lot of, please don't shoot me guys, a lot of women be more...
Don't be just worried about me. Be worried about the person who's listening on the other side. I'm not responsible for what...
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Please don't shoot me. I'm saying this into the mic.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a claim you're making. It needs...
to be substantiated?
Yes.
I feel like just based on my recent experiences and like the way I've seen a lot of women in the current generation behave, and also men as well, women are becoming more like, I wouldn't say aggressive, but more direct. Yeah. And men are becoming more indirect and like less, like just more elusive. And what I would normally have considered like at least 10, 20 years ago, men to be straight up like addressing everything from the beginning, but I've seen, like, just more from a romantic point of view as well, like I can most likely comment on that. Women have become more masculinized, and men on the other side.
But what is this masculinity? I'm still sort of trying to make sense. What exactly is this masculinity?
The conventional definition of masculinity, which I think we all understand. So
I don't
attributes.
understand what that is.
I'm more than happy to.
It's very fluid.
It's very fluid. These days, it's contentious.
Absolutely.
But, the traditional standard definition of someone who is masculine is someone who has, attributes that were associated with, traditional men, people who perhaps were strong, perhaps developed a certain sense of courage, bravery, and this goes back to the ancient times. But in my definition, at least, I think true masculinity is someone who's, able to be vulnerable, someone who takes full responsibility for the people around him, someone who's accountable to himself and to the community, someone who spreads peace, positivity, love, and is not afraid to show certain traits that perhaps in the past would have been deemed feminine. But it's true what Leo said.
I agree with you, but that still sounds like a woke definition of masculinity. I want to hear whether, if we speak of masculinity, does it have to do also with body structure? And which earlier on when we spoke, right? Body structure, issues of gender, and so on and so forth. Because earlier we spoke about women with temperaments before we started to sort of record this, to say, I mean, when we say masculinity has to do with just the body structure, does this sort of include other women whom by temperament they just have sort of a very strong kind of body physique or whatnot? Does it have to do also with gender? And by gender, we can sort of revert back or even interrogate whether is it the modern version of gender, or is it the postmodern version of gender. With the postmodern version of gender is that it's fluid, it makes room for the other and non-binaries and so on and so forth. I'm interested in that, and in addition also to the kind of expectations out of you. When we define masculinity, can we also pull out the kinds of expectations out of you? So when if you're married, Leong, or you got a partner who's sort of male, cisgender male, and somebody tries to step in your house, who masculinity, old version of it, would dictate it's a man who's supposed to step up and come and protect, right? But of which even mainstream feminism cannot reconcile that. Mainstream feminism can speak about 50-50, but when it comes to sort of now step up, there's a thief outside, a man saying, baby, there's somebody who's breaking in, go protect us, get the baseball bat or get the weapon, whatever it is. Even feminism cannot sort of stretch forth to sort of try to reconcile that for us. And I mean, these kind of chalks have sort of been softened up because I think we are trying so much to sort of shift back. And you're right, Leon, when you say there has been a bit of a shifting, so to say. And for me, I'm thinking the shifting, is it really a result of there should be the shift, or is a result of feminism sort of posing a particular threat to men such that men cannot assume, and execute their expectations? And it could be expectations on the basis of different things, right? It could be expectations in the context of culture. It could be expectations in the context of religion, and so on and so forth, right? So perhaps if we can sort of break through that. But I'm saying yours is a woke one because you sort of choosing the safer baseline. And I don't think to point out to say masculinity has to do with, be a man, make tough decisions, embrace toughness. I don't think that has anything to do at all with toxicity, which is why my question earlier was sort of moving towards, are we addressing masculinity or are we addressing masculinities? Because if we're moving towards toxicity, that's when we can start to speak about different versions of masculinity. So earlier on you spoke about fragile masculinity. But I don't think there's anything wrong at all to say, according to me, my own definition of masculinity should be attributed to cisgender male. It should be attributed to toughness, being bold, making tough decisions, protecting your family. And part of protection can spread to different things. Economic, it could be physical, it could be provision of shelter, and so on and so forth. But we are even afraid to talk about those. We're afraid to talk about it because the minute you articulate like that, then it sounds like, oh, there goes another misogynist.
It's a great point. I think just before we actually went on, we harped about toxic masculinity versus fragile masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to get Leong's point on this as well. But I'll say this. Toxic masculinity has become a buzzword. It's a trending topic, particularly amongst Gen Z. And, it's a controversial topic. It's a sensitive topic. Some people feel strongly against upholding the values of a traditional man. And perhaps that aggression can come across as being fragile and wanting to prove yourself and validate yourself to other people because of a deeper insecurity. And someone also might pose the argument that there's just not enough strong men these days. People who have a backbone, who stand for themselves, who, colloquially we say who stand on business, who are not moved. And there's an argument for and there's an argument against. And it's hard to pick a side, but I will say this, someone who stands on their morals, integrity and values, even if it means that they don't have perhaps the popularity and, the influence across the masses, is someone to be respected. And that's true masculinity, standing for your values and returning to your values, even if it's not congruent with what society dictates you to do. But I'd be interested to hear Leong's thoughts on masculinity. Yeah.
I would actually like to comment on what Tony actually said initially. So he raised a very interesting point about feminism and how that is associated with masculinity. And I certainly agree that when I say that I'm a feminist, I'm more of a womanist, and that dates back to the bell hooks theory. So that's the black definition of feminism. And when I associate myself with that, it's more so just for the economic, political, social equalities of women. But you see, over the years, feminism has now expanded, and whether or not that's a good thing, very disputable. But I have seen that there are flaws, and that you do see that there are aspects of feminism now that has become misandrous. And if people aren't familiar with that, that's the hatred of men. And so, as someone who does, I suppose, categorize myself as a feminism, as a feminist, my apologies, there are flaws that I am willing and able to accept and acknowledge. And it is that we did go too far in some aspects. There are times where you can accept that women do deserve equality of the sexes, in all these different aspects. But in acknowledging that we need equality in those avenues, you don't have to tear down a man. And there've been a lot of people, goes back to internet regulation as well, that push this disinformation, and then a lot of women start following that same there's a trope of women I know that just follow a lot of disinformation and don't really fact check where the origins of feminism are and why we are doing it in the first place. And I think we have reached, there are obviously still issues like gender pay gap and other intersectional issues that not only people of color face, but trans women, all those different types of categories of people face, that obviously do need to be addressed, and hopefully we can get a resolution. But it makes it very problematic to categorize whether someone is toxic masculine or if they're fragile, because you have the shift, you have it's almost like a blur between the two. And I think that's also a product of new age feminism.
I'd love to hear from him, because he's the one who spoke about fragile masculinity. I'm more in touch with what toxic masculinity is, but I think are you an intersectional feminist?
Yes.
Right, but more towards a womanist perspective. Yes. Yeah. I've got a problem with mainstream feminism, and I think you articulated it very well. The way in which, the foot soldiers are raised to sort of demonize a man, whereas womanism basically doesn't even... so it's from the works of Alice Walker in the late 80s, basically. Your bell hooks were writing more within the frames of feminism, a touch of womanism, but I think the person who sort of articulated womanism very well. It's Alice Walker through the color purple and her text In Search of, I think it's called In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, which is a womanist prose. She's done very well in terms of womanism. Womanism does not sort of bother itself, or it's not in pursuit of power in the way that mainstream feminism is. And womanism basically articulates very well that if the black sisters attack a black man, they are basically inherently attacking their own space, because a black man is part and integral of a black woman's context.
Yep.
Which many sisters are actually not really thinking. I think you've actually articulated that very well. Fragile.
Yeah, because even when I did review feminism, womanism, before women of color could attain any sort of freedom or any sort of progression, we had to assist in the civil rights movement. Yep. So we were there frontline with black men, assisting them. And that's why I think new age feminism can be a bit problematic, because if you think about the objective of feminism or womanism at the time, in the early days, it wasn't for I suppose a power trip. That's what I'm seeing nowadays.
Which one? Feminism? I think
feminism
had.
Now, yeah.
I think even then it had, but it wasn't as bad as it was now. Because if you date back towards the suffrage movement in the US, women fighting to have the right to vote, there's black sisters who actually joined the movement with hopes that even them, they're going to be accommodated into the voting patterns. Yep. But only to discover that actually the white sisters were being a voice for themselves.
Yeah,
which is why then the distinction between black radical feminism and just feminism itself, and the whole different phases which feminism went through, right? From your liberal feminism to radical feminism, black radical feminism, and then later on the black radical feminism starts to be sort of a bit in touch with lesbian feminism, and so on and so forth, moving all the way back to where we are, which Alice Walker, when she was actually coming in, she was trying to address those very same things. She said, and which is why some of my close white friends, when they listened to a conversation I had with a womanist scholar, Nikki Black, who's in the States, they were like, we thought we would sort of appreciate womanism because at least it sort of points to us. It's sort of a soft critique to mainstream feminism. But the problem is that womanism says, well, this is a space for black people. Because you white sisters took the entire feminism. Feminism is actually white driven, not having women of color in it. But it doesn't mean that then, black sisters have to sort of throw away the entire sort of concept of because, concept of feminism is still good. I believe in the concept of feminism, fighting for the liberation of women, emancipation of women, economically, socially, politically, and so on and so forth. I agree with that. But the problem is that now the radicals, when they come in, and perhaps also there's nothing wrong with radicalness, but radicalness has to be sound. It's when radicalness now begin to lose its rationality that I've got a problem with it. But again, the whole idea also of radicalness, it could be sort of a subjective point, because somebody might say, what do you mean by radicalness? And my conception of what radical is might sound different to another person's conception of radicalness, right? So I've got a bit of an issue with feminism in that way, in the sense that you are correct. Actually, most sisters follow the trend. They tweet. They involved in doxing. And part of the critique I've posed in the past is the fact that I do not see a restorative justice within the feminist, movement, in the sense that if there has been doxing against Tony is labeled a rapist and so on, but Tony gets exonerated by the courts, and you've already tarnished Tony's reputation. How does then the feminists who were foot soldiers in assisting a sister doing all the doxing, how do they come to sort of help Tony repair his dignity? Then they are not there. And there's the whole flipping back into the reasoning that, well, you're a man, you've got your own privilege, you always find your way back into society. But is that the same thing to a black man compared to a white man? If you say, let's think also through the race aspect, can we say it's the same thing in terms of economics? Completely different things, right? So, which is why I've got an issue, but I understand where womanism comes in, and also intersectional feminists, the way they come from, because I can see at least, there is a reconciling of something in there.
Sure.
And also similar aspects into masculinity, which is certainly not sort of touching it much more inside. We're sort of circling around it, right? You're still going to tell us about fragile masculinity, but masculinity in itself, there's good aspects of it and there's terrible aspects of it, which deserves to be called out, right? And also when we engage things such as toxic masculinity in the context of labeling things. You spoke earlier on about labeling, and I was listening to the concept of labeling, but you were not necessarily saying labeling. You mentioned it's something else, to say it's problematic if we're going to call words such as masculinity or fragile and whatnot. I'm thinking I can understand the fact that it's problematic, but I wouldn't really say, because you do need to have something that can sit accurately when you sort of define it or when you speak of it. And what helps us to do that is exactly the labels, right? To say this is what I'm talking about. But then we remain with the whole burden of how do we reconcile the labels if we do not see eye to eye in terms of, the definitions, and how people say definitions mutate, but the mutating is shifting the goalposts and so on and so forth. All those sort of makes the whole conversation a little murky. But I'm not entirely saying it's bad. I wouldn't say it's bad to have the labels, but I'd say, how do we use them?
The labels as in how people choose to
Toxic
identify.
masculinity, fragile masculinity.
We need to stop the work community in defining terms such as that, because it becomes very ill-defined, I think. But I'll let this masculine one over here take the floor.
Hey, listen.
Are you a version of masculinity? Because you're very buffed and very manly in a suit, in a tie. Whereas if I come in my shorts, then this is not a masculine person. This is just
if you wear a
street
skirt.
kid or whatnot.
I don't think it's for me to say if I'm masculine or not. I think it's for other people to perceive. I'd like to be masculine in a way that's positive, not toxic or fragile, or going above and beyond to denigrate people or make people feel smaller than. But I will say this, toxic masculinity, when it's accepted, when it's allowed to permeate within our social circles, our friends, that's when it becomes a bigger monster. I'll give an easy example. If we're 3 guys, hypothetically, and perhaps someone says something that's a bit offensive or rude, as typical banter goes, me being complicit and saying, yeah, that's true, or just laughing and allowing that thought, to be reinforced into the person who said that thought, promotes toxic masculinity indirectly, promotes fragile masculinity indirectly, because I'm affirming my friend who has perhaps a very controversial standpoint, and if I don't police it at the beginning, and then he goes into a different space and shares the same issue.
Let me ask you a question in this way so we can see how you reaffirm that argument.
Here we go.
Oh, no.
Here we go.
So if feminists say if you're defending a rapist, then it means you've also probably raped before. Is that within the same frame you're saying, or in terms of your explanation about complicity? Deserves, or so basically the idea of you're also probably a rapist deserves to be debunked, or it should be let go on the basis that by you being quiet, you're being complicit?
I think that's a sensitive question to ask, and ultimately a serious allegation like rape needs to be substantiated. But remaining silent, perhaps if you know the facts, I think is being complicit.
For sure.
You have a responsibility to speak out, because rape is not an issue between 2 individuals. It's a societal issue.
Right.
It's an issue that can grow and really destroy a society if it's not mitigated initially. And people always say it could happen to you. What if it was your sister? What if it was your mother? What if it was your girlfriend? What would happen next? I don't think that's a good approach. It shouldn't have to happen to you first for you to come out as a masculine man and say this is wrong. Justice for everyone means justice for the person that you know personally, and justice for individuals perhaps you've never spoken with or who you've never interacted with at a deep level. So going back to your question, if someone, accuses perhaps someone I know of rape, and I remain complicit and I remain silent, even if I know the facts, I think that's acting against masculinity. And you can't even say that it's the opposite of masculinity, because that would be an offense to anyone who, accustoms themselves as the opposite of masculinity. So it needs to be treated with the contempt it deserves. True masculinity means, as I said at the top of the episode, standing for something, even if it means that you'll have to disappoint perhaps your close circle, perhaps your close comrades, people that you have within your your Cosa Nostra, your inner circle. Having values and living a life consistent with those values is what true masculinity is. But I'd be interested to have your thoughts and Leong's thoughts as well as to what, standing against toxic and fragile masculinity would accustom.
I certainly agree. I think at the end of the day, the obligation is on men, like in toxic masculinity spaces, to address it, because they're the ones that have the privilege of doing so. So I agree certainly with everything that Eddie has said, but do you see like men of this generation conforming to that sort of masculinity?
The honest answer is no.
Yeah,
the honest answer is no, and it comes from fear. People fear not having that level of acceptance amongst their friends, and that's a deeper issue, because the identity of a man, self-concept of a man, first and foremost begins with validation. Studies have been done, actually, empirical studies have been done, and it says, the crux of the study is men tend to have these inflated egos, and it comes from a place of insecurity, and it needs to be constantly reaffirmed as they grow, whereas women are socialized differently and have more appreciation for themselves before other people might influence them negatively and say, no, you're not this, you're not this. These are the beauty standards that you need to accustom to. These are the standards that you need to follow. So when it comes to men, people fear going against the grain. They fear disappointing their homies or their friends because it's not fashionable. It's not something that would lead to them having social acceptance or rising in the hierarchy amongst their friends, which ties down to their self-concept. And the moment they feel attacked, the moment they feel that, they don't have the social proof that they would have if they stand against an issue, they compromise their values in the short term. But once they have their quiet moments and they're alone and perhaps they have time to reflect on their behavior, is when their conscience perhaps eats at them. And it's something that is reinforced from childhood, and it manifests later on when people are adults. And this whole culture of, having a toxic environment around you, men validating other men, perhaps with issues that are not socially acceptable, it becomes a huge issue. It's not just within smaller groups or friendship groups or community groups. It can manifest towards even being an international issue, as you've spoken about at the top of the episode. Perhaps Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, is being influenced by people within his social circle to condemn the actions of Elon Musk. Perhaps those people have ulterior motives, which are being influenced by nothing to do with morality, but more to do with their own personal interests. So, as I said before, and I'll reiterate it here, people need to take a stand, particularly men. Men need to take a stand to embrace their individuality, and for me, that's true masculinity.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you in what you said earlier on. Like the way you expressed the whole idea of how men should sort of speak against any kind of ills of other men, and also to say we do need, I think you had said something like, did you say teach more about some of these concepts of, I think part of educating us should also tap into what exactly makes us to sort of fail within our concepts of masculinity or whatnot. Yeah. What other things out there that are existing that can help us can help support us to have a good idea of what masculinity is. So for instance, we sort of invested into, well, that's toxic, that one is this, that one is that, but there's aspects about culture that we sort of leave behind. Yeah. We leave outside, the entire conversation, because culture is different. Earlier on when you spoke about looking at masculinity from the context of Sudan and also from the context of Australia, they're very different. I was sort of keen to hear in what way in particular is it more, so that I can be able to see the distinction in terms of culture, because obviously Sudan and Australia are way two different kind of contexts. Right. I mean, my first appearance, I would say a bit of a culture shock, which most of African men actually encounter here, is seeing when you visit an Australian family, then the men can actually tell all of you to sit down while he goes and prepare coffee for the visitors. Whereas in an African context, you know it's gonna be the woman who goes and prepares something in the kitchen, right? Yeah. So that itself redefining it's sort of aspects of culture. We don't call it issues because some of things are not necessarily issues, but just aspects of culture which should be brought into context, and also things around economics that I think should be brought in whenever we speak about concepts of masculinity, of masculinity, because all those are things that also support. Yeah,
that would back up that. Just with regards to economics and masculinity, and I'd also want Leong just to chip in. In instances where people are in a romantic relationship and perhaps the woman is making significantly much more money than the man, from your perspective, would you think it would make the man less masculine?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
That's just because I think I've always been in a position where I've always worked. Yeah. Like, I haven't gone a year without working ever since I turned 16. So just from that perspective, like, I'm quite aware that, like, men and, like, boys my age, they're all at different stages of their lives. So say, for example, when I was 19, I wouldn't be expecting a salary of a 30-year-old man. Like, and I think another problematic thing is people see social media and they're expecting like Dior, Chanel, everything on the bed, and I'm quite like, I'm able to understand that that's not achievable for everybody, even from someone who has worked almost like 6-7 years now. So I don't think that it's fair, coming from a feminist point of view as well, if we are striving to have equality with the economic point of view. You can't expect the man to primarily just be serving. But in saying that, men also have to get in the kitchen.
I knew that was a caveat.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I think at the same time, there is a bit of an articulation of culture, and I'm not sure whether I can say in your context, is it culture, is it individual family culture, or is it a societal culture? Because in a context where women are raised to understand that a man should provide, because again, the concept of men should provide can differ in the context of Australia and also in the context of a certain African country.
Yeah.
So in the way that those can differ, women who've sort of internalized quite a lot this idea that a man should be able to provide, if they're sort of sustaining you or supporting a man, it might seemingly appear as if this is not a man enough, right?
Sure.
Even you yourself as a man, you'll feel that kind of pressure, because if you look at also the literature around suicide among men, you find that actually those are sort of certain aspects that men tend to reason around, to say, okay, they attempted suicide or somebody died by suicide, but what was captured is that prior to that, they've been complaining a lot about the inability to sort of provide for their own families, right? So that sort of bears, much more weight in the sense that we still revert back to culture. But again, it is possible that it could be men's kind of pressure as opposed to the woman applied the pressure, because there are certain women who are understanding out there, right? And they can go the way of supporting a man, provided you as a man also you're proving that you are doing something on your side, right? We're not talking about you're kind of crazy, acrimony kind of a woman. I know that some feminists will feel crazy that I'm sort of associating this with acrimony kind of a woman whom the man is pushing with his battery, but you don't see that as well.
Where's the Chanel bag?
That is such a good movie.
So there are certain women who are sort of understanding, but again, then there's the thing of also having to understand that some women, if they start to disrespect you as a man, it might also come from a space of, now I'm tired, I'm pushing and I'm pulling everything, but it doesn't look like the other person is sort of coming onto the party to sort of, reason with me here and there. Because there are also those kind of men who literally can just sit, and do nothing.
Absolutely. And the premise of my question actually was how, if in a dynamic where the woman perhaps is more financially stable than the man, how does that affect the romance in the relationship? Obviously, times have changed, and these days, there's at least people are trying to reduce the gender pay gap, but we are seeing more women take up positions of leadership, which is a great thing. But in the event, perhaps, as you've alluded to, Tony, where the man is not where he wants to be financially, and it's affecting his self-concept and the way he interacts with his partner, would that affect the relationship in a way his masculinity is diminished? Would that change how he's perceived as a man and as, you know, the head of the household and someone who's competent enough to make the decisions? Or that's inconsequential regardless how much money he's making?
It depends on culture, but at best, I'm confident that it definitely will affect the men.
Yeah.
Because you understand, whether culturally or religiously, it is incumbent upon that a man should provide, a man should support, and part of the provision and support comes even from the financial, component of it. It doesn't leave finances out of it. So I'd say definitely the man is going to be wounded here. And you better have a good sister, because if you don't have a good sister, then you're in deep trouble.
I think even if we were looking at deconstructing masculinity and removing aspects of the toxic side of it, we would still come to the conclusion that it does.
But do we really have to deconstruct? Because here's the thing, I love deconstructing in certain places, but when it comes to masculinity, if we are clear, right? If we are clear that there is masculinity and there's toxic masculinity, I'm not thinking of any deconstruction here. Because if you then want to come and say, let's deconstruct masculinity, there seems to be this presupposition that masculinity in its entirety is toxic. But we do have the distinctions between what is masculinity and what is toxic masculinity. Yeah. So what are we deconstructing? I could be wrong, but help me see what you see.
Well, I think if you consider like the attribute of like being someone who's protective, that can, like, I think if you put that on a spectrum, it could be considered sometimes a bit, I don't know, it could be perceived as toxic. So you could say there's protective, but like, when does the line start blurring and it becomes possessive and like controlling? Like, although we have like our own like conceptions of things, I still do find that it is really hard to come to a conclusion of what masculinity should be. And I think that's why it needs to be deconstructed in a way that we are able to list, like, I don't know. I think in a whole it's problematic.
We already know, misogyny is part of the toxic, misogyny from men is part of toxic masculinity, right? Abusive is part of toxic masculinity. Yeah. Domestic violence, sexual harassment in whatsoever lens you want to go is part of toxic masculinity, right? Wouldn't be sure about mansplaining and whatnot. Also, that might depend on the context, which is why I'm saying if we are able to sort of point out that here is toxic masculinity and here is masculinity. Okay, what is masculinity? Being precise in speech, being strong, being able to cater, but that being attributed to men as opposed to women, obviously falling back into the I'm open to sort of be welcomed into saying, but is it not possible to come across women who are masculine in that case? So for instance, if we are to locate in the conversation women who are single parents, right? Yeah. The man is not there, but they sort of juggle both of the roles. I would say I'm happy to have them coming on board. What role are they playing? They could play a role of nurture. Then that's much more attributed to, the femininity, the feminine aspect of them. And this is not to say also that there's no man who can sort of play nurture very well, right? Because we can also think of a concept where there's only a man looking after the kids, and there's no woman. It could swing in different ways. So I'm not sort of ruling out the fact that you could still find a woman who sort of can be categorized within masculinity, but on what kind of traits? Okay, you're bold, you're strong, you can provide kind of safety financially, house-wise, and so on and so forth. Then yes, I'm happy with that. That's the own definition of masculinity. So if I'm able to give you the distinction between this is masculinity, this is toxic, to claim that we are deconstructing masculinity inherently means that even the good part that I showed you, the safe part that I showed you is problematic. But how about we say, let's challenge, because it seems to me what you're saying, your articulation is mainly challenging toxic masculinity than having to say we're deconstructing masculinity. Masculinity is not bad. Society thrives at the strength of men. Same way society thrives at the strength of, at the warmth of women, right? It's both people playing, the important roles in building their families and in building society. And yes, it could cross over. Men could sort of have a nurture trait. Women could have a masculine trait. But so if in that case we say we're speaking of masculinity where even women are involved, what kind of toxic masculinity can you trace from women who've got a male temperament or from women?
That's a loaded question. That's a very loaded question. But it's true what you said, men and even women as well will not be 100% masculine or 100% feminine. There are certain traits that we'll pick up from different genders. And, now I'll need to be politically correct because people can be transgender and there's so many other genders involved. But true the essence of masculinity, and I think you've spoken about this even in a previous podcast, having this capacity to lead, protect, provide in a sense, and I know we've harped on about financial provision, but provide in a way that people feel safe in your presence. And I think the biggest point is emotional intelligence and emotional maturity. There's a misnomer that perhaps people who are buff or big or have a presence about them, it's directly or indirectly correlated to the size of their intelligence. So if you have maybe an XY axis, the bigger you are, perhaps your intelligence diminishes. But
really?
Yeah, people have debunked this theory and they've said it's actually called the bodyguard theory. You guys should look it up. And they said people who perhaps are known for physical virility, for strength, might be a bit limited with regards to their ability to reason. And it's, in a bad way, it's being attributed to the bodyguards perhaps we might see in these nightclubs who don't really take their time to perceive an issue before they act. But true strength and true masculinity is internal. They say the curtain matches the drapes. Your inside world matches your outside world. Who you say you are when you look at yourself in the mirror is a direct reflection of who you are and how other people perceive you. There's no disconnect or lack or limitation where you carry yourself one way, but deep within yourself as a man, and as you purport to be a masculine man, you know that there are several holes in your character. And one small issue or one small conflict in your life, you completely, self-implode because you're not living an authentic life. So true masculinity is authenticity. And you spoke about, fragile masculinity, and I think Leong also contributed to the chat as well.
Authenticity in the context of what? I'm thinking,
yep.
Maybe let me throw this. Two things I'd love for us to sort of spread out into this conversation, and then for me, that's it. We can choose any.
Sure.
When we speak of authenticity, I'm thinking, here's a 60-year-old man. It might sound like it's completely out of context, but I'm trying to bring it on context. 60-year-old man, right, who's a pastor in South Africa dating a 16-year-old girl.
I saw that.
And giving all this nice gifts and food and whatnot. And the mother of the 16-year-old doesn't seem to be disagreeing with all this, right? One would say, but their relationship seems to be authentic. Parents know about it. Parents are accepting it or whatsoever. Obviously, there's an aspect of law that we need to sort of speak about, because in South Africa, 16 can consent, but 16 cannot be in a relationship with an ancestor in that level. So at least the significant other should be like 2 years apart. If it's more than 2 years apart, the older one is likely to face punishment by law. Someone might say this is authentic, right? And we hop on to Kenya. There's two young people there, I think Bree and Kyle.
Yeah.
Whom Kyle is about 21 of age and Bree is about 17 or 19 if I'm not mistaken, who happen to be siblings living in the same area, same father, so they're half siblings basically.
Yeah.
And they're dating and they've moved in together. So going back to incest. And one might say, but they seem to be serious about each other. Obviously, there's issues of culture and laws around that say, how are we getting governed? And there's always reproval from society based on culture and whatnot, but even though it could be a selective culture, so to say, because probably ancient culture might have permitted, even from our lineage, might have permitted incest, but later on we changed things and whatnot. Because again, the word culture, I feel like sometimes it's just exploited it's exploited in whatever way sometimes. So one might say, okay, here's authenticity.
I'll speak to
Can you unpack the authenticity for us?
I'll first speak to the relationship between the 60-year-old,
the 40-year-old and the 16
and the 16-year-old lady.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a massive power dynamic, regardless of whether the man thinks it's authentic or not. And this is somebody who is impressionable at a developmental stage in their lives. And it disappointed me that the mother was actually accepting of such a relationship. Yeah. And obviously, you can see that there's a financial element. She is providing for the family.
Definitely.
So that's what's causing the mother to turn the blind eye. But it sets a negative precedent for all the other relationships in the future, where perhaps a woman or a young woman from a lower socioeconomic background feels the need to try and be attractive to older men, and considerably older men, people in their 50s and 60s, just to provide financial relief to their families. I think women need to be looking up to stronger role models, women who are well respected in society, who leverage their skills, their God-given ability, and their hard work to offer value to society, rather than offering just a relationship.
I understand what you're saying, and I hold the similar sentiment, right? But above all those, let me pursue these virtues and whatnot, there's a reality of I'm hungry right now. How does me looking up to, that strong, powerful woman put food on my table? So I agree with you. So I guess what I'm saying is that part of our conversation, if it can be around, fixing those things, because clearly we can see it's not just a matter of love here. We've got a problem of finances, and we can spend a whole time saying, yeah, that's a bad mother, or that's a bad man. And, I mean, worst of all, he's a pastor, and I'm not sure if he's married or whatnot, but he's a head of a church. That itself has its own ways. So we can spend a whole lot of generous of time pointing fingers. You're bad, but that's almost what everybody in the community does. So as scholars and big brains as you are from law, fraternity and whatnot, how do we sort of fix this, knowing very well that, yes, obviously in Australia that's less likely to happen. You can face jail time, or you might not face jail time. I'm not sure very well in terms of how Australia unpacks that. For instance, like I said, in South Africa, at least it has to be 2 years apart. But if that one is now 40, that's now an ancestor, whatnot, right? Yeah. But how do we reason around that and try to fix all these things? Because these things are happening within our communities, right? Yeah. And many men, which that's where then part of the point that you said about being complicit, I liked it, is that many men came and said, well, but the mother is happy about it. All that is not seen as part of being complicit to the kids. But don't you see there's something fundamentally wrong here? Until you take the question to be more personal, say, if it was your daughter, would you allow that? Then many are like, that's what. I wouldn't do that. Then you see the selfishness out of men who are actually complicit in all this, kind of behaviors. But apart from just pointing fingers, how can we solve this in the context of let's address our education, let's address our finance? Because I think part of look up to other women is part of their education. It might be both formal or informal, but at the end of the day, we're still remaining. I can look up to Oprah, but I'm hungry now.
It's a sensitive issue. I'll let Leon weigh in.
I was literally about to say. I think it turns to the point that you raised before about like our background. And another thing that I've been grappling with growing up is conditioning, what I've been conditioned to, and unlearning a lot of things. So it comes down to being very self-aware. You need to be able to identify that there are things that are inherently flawed. So I think with the 40-year-old, 16-year-old, that dynamic there, back home, a lot of people don't see much like issue with that. I think moving onwards and like also bringing in my feminist perspective as well, you have to be able to compartmentalize what's right and what's wrong, and morally, like there is a power dynamic, as Eddie said earlier, and there are things that we need to put in place. Like the obligation is also on ourselves to identify what you're doing is wrong and like be able to move accordingly. I think that was actually another point I was going to raise with the Elon Musk situation as well, when you said that there needs to be regulation. There does need to be regulation, but there also needs to be education.
Yeah.
And within that education, we also need to be quite aware that you can't listen to everything that's on the internet. The same way we used to laugh at our mums for sending us things on WhatsApp and believing it. We're believing TikTok, we're believing X, we're believing Facebook.
It's true.
So we need to be more autonomous in our thinking and not just, I guess, listening to everything that is provided to us, or like even listening to values and ideals that essentially did exist times before us. There are times where we have to debunk ideologies that we have been comfortable with and learn to be uncomfortable. So that's the way I would phrase it.
I think she summed it up perfectly. I think so.
Yeah, definitely. I think the law should bite.
Yes.
Education should educate, and education, unfortunately, I wouldn't say, because again, with the world systems changing, I'm very wary sometimes of trusting formal education to
Absolutely.
do something. The woke, if they get into the office, they can change everything about our children, right? Because people said it. They said, okay, well, there's certain fears if the radical left can bring us into allowing children to do gender reassignment, how far are we to get to sort of reason with pedophilia and say, well, they're not doing nothing wrong. They're just sexually attracted to kids. They shouldn't be met with reproval.
Yeah.
And one was saying we're moving towards that direction. Therefore, we need to stay alert of such and speak out and whatnot. So education, home education, very much important. But again, apart from just home education, I would think about people who are well off, being intentional in mentoring kids. Because let's be honest, some people will come from families where you may find that you're first generation university attendees. Therefore, if you're not available around your siblings or your cousins, other people who are there, they only know a different kind of education than the one that you have, right?
That's true, yeah.
So perhaps investing our energy a lot into mentorship and how our mentorship should not just be about information, find ways also to sort of allow mentorship to be healthy, but also be about availability of resources. I've seen a number of sort of, what do you call that? Pads drive, whatever they call it in South Africa, where many people will do sanitary pads drive and whatnot as part of giving back, and it's the bare minimum, because the point is we all don't have the necessary resources to can feed the entire Africa, so to say, but doing at best what you can. So yes, education, the law should bite, being intentional in our mentoring, that should actually come in very handy. And then the aspect of role models and whatnot can also fit in perfectly. And if I'm a mentor, I don't see myself as being a role model to my proteges or mentees, right? Yeah. They may decide to see me as one, but I definitely don't try to push myself to be, a role model to my mentees. I'd say you have a different, if ever, and also have different mentors or inspirations in different areas, because you cannot try to trust me in the context of finances, where else I'm not financially controlled, yet. Right? Whatever the case. So yes, I think different aspects, we do need that to sort of step in and yeah.
And I think you raised an important point that Leong alluded to as well. Fact-checking information.
True.
Stand guard at the entrance of the mind. Vet the information that you consume. Be in a position to make informed decisions. Don't just be like a flag being swayed in the wind. The issue is, I wouldn't say it's laziness per se, where people just allow themselves to be influenced. I think it's more of conditioning. If you perceive someone to be of a high value and they're influential in your life, you'll probably take what they say as the gospel truth. So developing the capacity to make your own decisions is a trait. I wouldn't say necessarily masculinity, just a trait of someone who's self-aware in general. And, I'd urge the listeners, I'd urge perhaps people who come across the podcast and are interested in issues of, relating to masculinity. Masculinity can be a point, perhaps for a young man who's listening to this, to be more self-aware, vet the information that you come across, and don't be too opinionated to stand for an idea without doing the relevant research yourself.
True.
I think Leong can appreciate the amount of research that goes on day to day, perhaps if you're in the legal profession,
Of
the
course.
amount of documents you review, but it actually helps other aspects of your life. You're less naive. You're more in a position to say, okay, this source says this. Perhaps if I see another independent source, they can give me a different idea, or 6 or 7 other sources. I'll withhold my comments or withhold my position until I've consulted widely. And that should be an aspect you take into every aspect of your life. And masculinity is no exception. If you say, you get your information on masculinity from a controversial figure, like, let's say, Professor Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate or Tristan Tate, I think you need to vet all the sources where you're getting the information from. I know that people are going to be perhaps affronted by those comments. These figures that I've mentioned perhaps are role models to them, and that's fine. The hallmark of a democratic society, people are free to make their own decisions. But at least don't do yourself the disservice of not vetting wide spectrums of information before you make a decision. Yeah, I think those are my closing points.
I also think there are scholars and there are internet personalities that will deliver like concepts of masculinity, and they're not all inherently bad. Like there are things that Andrew Tate has said that I'm kind of on board with. Like people need to be able to listen to something, critically analyze, and essentially the onus is on you, the responsibility is on you to reflect and digest that information. Same way in law, you can't just get someone done in criminal proceedings just with basically any like evidence. It needs to be, the burden of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. And so I think that has challenged us in our thinking and has made me perceive things completely differently. But if people were to approach it in that way, in that light, that you can't necessarily just take one baseless claim and just accept it for what it is. Everything needs to be taken with a grain of salt.
Right. So we are agreeing 40-year-old that's being toxic, right?
Absolutely.
16-year-old needs to be protected. Would we argue the same in terms of the siblings who are dating? Would you say, because part of the protection and whatnot comes with the extra layer of the story with the Kenyan young people is that the young boy claims the father is a deadbeat. The father knows about both of them, but it seemed he was just present for the young lady, Brie, but not present for Kyle. And then as a result, they end up dating. I mean, all those kind of things. So if we say masculinity entails also educating, entails protection and whatnot, would we say all these are results of a failed masculinity? The fact that he has siblings who persist on dating, but the father is said to not be there for the boy, in a sense that he could have taught the boy certain values and whatsoever. Because this is really deviance from societal norms, and everybody's sort of like outraged about this in Kenya.
It is, and it hits closer to home, obviously, as a Kenyan. But I'll say this. Ultimately, the responsibility would fall perhaps with the people who formed these children's belief, so their parents. And a true, masculine parent or a true masculine figure would raise their hand up and say, I take full responsibility for what has happened, perhaps by acts of omission myself. I wasn't there to guide this child in the early stages of their life. I wasn't there to inform them that these are their siblings, these are the people that they're related with. And when I discovered that this relationship was ongoing, I didn't take any active steps to mitigate it, or at least to caution these young people on the dangers of engaging in a romantic relationship as relatives. The young people obviously are not absolved from any blame because they're adults. 21 years old, you should be in a position to make a decision. But it comes back to who formed them, who mentored them when they were younger. If you are a truly masculine person in their life...
That still sounds like a contradictory to the fact that a 21-year-old is older.
Absolutely.
There's a Gillies motto in the UK that says actually a child can be considered competent if they've proven without reasonable doubt that they understand what is on the table. So we can't always make a claim that a 21-year-old really understands what is on the table.
Well,
So
maturity is
that
relative.
critique really stands
Yeah.
to say, well, you're an adult, you should have known better.
I think that's a good point. But my position would be, I think maturity is relative. I could say you're 16 years old, you should know what's right and wrong. But we see people who are in their 50s and 60s who make those mistakes every day. But I say this to say this, you know, having a moral compass, and once you discovered, at least in their case, that they were related, and of course they're being influenced by their family, people around them, that this is something that is morally not acceptable.
Yes.
For them to persist with the
That's a good
relationship,
point, yeah.
for them to persist with the relationship despite, you know, the advice that they've received, ultimately leads them, you know, to be implicit to what's
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
As I said it before in one of the questions that you raised, an act of an omission is still a crime.
Yes.
The fact that you did not do something
Mm.
when it was
Could have
reasonably
done,
foreseeable you
yeah.
could do something is a crime in itself.
Mm-hmm.
So as much as we want to point the finger and say the dad is wrong, he should have taken a stance against this, we also need to look at the young people involved in this relationship. They have made a conscious decision to be together, knowing that they're related, knowing, you know, that it's basically incest, which in my opinion, they can't be vindicated from what they've done. Yeah, so they need to take responsibility, especially the boy in the relationship. Since we're speaking about masculinity, he needs to take a stand and say, this is wrong. I've done this for X amount of time. I'm ready to make reparations and change my ways. Yeah.
It's a hard one because he doesn't think it's wrong, Leong?
Well, I don't have any grand contributions. I think Eddie put it quite simply. The burden kind of does lie on the father, who would have, if he was in his masculine state, he should take what's the word?
Responsibility.
Yes, that's the word. Oh my gosh, I just had a mind blank. He should take responsibility in the way he did raise the children, but also in saying that the kids have now grown and they're at a very mature age to both of them, I reckon, even notwithstanding the fact that 21 could still be disputed as not mature. They still are both in a position to make informed decisions, and knowing that what they are committing is incest and still going ahead with that is not being masculine in any way.
Not at all.
So yeah, I don't have much to really add, but yeah, just the fact that the kids now do have more of a obligation to try and change the trajectory of the way the relationship is going, but they're being complicit. All these words that we've thrown around, they are intentionally still wanting to stay in this relationship, and that is inherently problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you because I just asked a question. I didn't sort of position myself as yet about
Yeah,
this.
for sure.
I think I would say there is an aspect of men failing his duty. So masculinity is sort of shaky there, but from the context of the father, because according to the young man Kyle, he believes that the father knows about him, but he's just not involved. Apparently, they've got same name and surprisingly enough, they both have the hobby of painting. I'm not sure whether there's just art painting or there's this construction painting. I think art painting basically.
Should be art, yeah.
And I think they're in the same school, something like that, living in the same area. But they didn't know each other until maybe probably less than 3 years. I'm not sure, something like that. But that can be fact checked. What I love about the story at the same time is that it does not just make us think particularly about the fact that here's two young people dating, but it speaks about responsibilities of ourselves at all times, right? Because things like this are bound to happen, and it's because of one not taking a certain level of accountability.
Yeah.
It could be nature also and the spiritual forces bringing things which were hidden to the light. Because one thing also I'm open about is the fact that I know nothing much about whether did the father know about the young man, or the mother to the young man hid him, and then now with time certain things becomes unraveled. So whatever the case may be, obviously there's too many things to consider here. But if I am to take Kyle on his word that the father knows about him, he's just been a deadbeat, I do definitely see a shaky masculinity, and that might open a different kind of a conversation, because also there's stories around a lot of men who would say, we do want to be involved in our kids, but the baby mamas are a problem, you know. Right?
All the time,
The baby mamas are standing on our way, they're driving me crazy, it's all this and all that, which then also can add another different layer to sort of unpack later on if we've got sort of factual things about it. But at the moment, out of recklessness, I sort of agree with you all to say there is a shaky masculinity in terms of the failed accountability of a man raising his own son.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this moment itself, as you said, I think both of you all said to say, personally, the two young people may think this is good, but if they see that society is sort of approaching this with reproval, perhaps a time to retreat would have been best. Then
For sure.
I
For
guess
sure, yeah.
people who've been beaten by love many a times would sort of try to tell us whether is it easy to let go of somebody you really, really loved, regardless of whether this is my sibling or not. Because love is another stupid thing.
That last part of the sentence threw me off. But
Yeah, I wasn't ready for that.
But I'll say this, and it goes back to what you said. If we look at the genesis of this relationship between these two young people, it comes simply as a result because of the father who didn't take full responsibility for the relationship. You can see the effects of masculinity not being followed to. It compromises the social fabric of society. What's the social fabric of society? The family, the nucleus. A group of families make a community. If the family is broken, at first instance, where the father is not in the children's life, it leads to things like this. And who's to say that they won't perpetuate this cycle in the future in their own families? Now we have a cycle of people who are willingly committing incest or willingly, celebrating the fact that they don't have a stable home. Family values are being compromised. People are not seeing the value of a man and a woman getting married and having children and raising them to have, values and principles. And now it's a bigger societal issue. Single parent homes. And you guys know the statistics around, children who grow up with one parent or with no parents. The likelihood of them, reaching societal outcomes and being people of value in society is significantly diminished. Not to say that they can't, but they definitely have the obstacles against them. So masculinity is having that bigger picture thinking and saying, okay, this is how I feel at 25 or 26 years old. But tomorrow I'll be a leader, I'll be 50, I'll be 60. I want to set the standard for having a family-based thinking and put it around for my friends as well. Not just for me to have a successful and flourishing family in the future, but for me to be the bedrock of my community and say, this is how this person lives, and he influences people around him to live in that way. He's respected his masculinity, and as a result, a strong community. And we speak about this again and again. Yeah. Communities where there's strong male figures, higher levels of trust in society, leads to lower crime, more economic prosperity. Children and women are comfortable to walk around the streets at night because they know the men hold themselves to high standards. Communities where there's no men to show other men this is the right path to take. It leads to socially deviant men, young men, which leads to more insecurity. Children have to come home 3 p.m., 4 p.m. They are afraid because they don't know what type of men are wandering the streets looking for validation. So it's the butterfly effect. Such a small thing, a butterfly flapping its wings, can have a huge change on climate. That means on social fabric, on crime, on policing, on all the social evils we see. So just to wrap up that point and, perhaps move towards a conclusion. Taking responsibility at the first instance, before he even made the decision to start a family or perhaps to pursue the woman of his children romantically or in a sexual fashion, I think you need to think about the bigger picture. Not to say that, we're perfect and we all make, the right decisions, but having that maturity to do it and to know that there's repercussions to your behavior will ultimately lead you to making less mistakes and less impacts of this where, such an issue can be trending on social media.
That's true.
Yeah.
Was that your parting shot?
Should be, yeah.
I'll allow you to come here again.
Oh,
Let's see how it
sorry,
is.
I can't even top that. That was that was so beautifully said. I think what he was concluding on was just the aspect of accountability and how important that is. I think also bringing it back to like the legal landscape with actions and omissions, what Eddie was also alluding to before, even if you have not committed the action or you want to plead ignorance or you just didn't know, the court does form the view at some stage that you ought to have known.
Yep.
So I think everyone needs to kind of implement that into their thinking and into becoming more masculine. And yeah, I think that's the best way to conclude it. I think he's really summed it up so well.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Totally agree. I would love to chat with you in the future. Perhaps about protecting the sanctity of the family, because I think what we sort of ending on now is really about thinking and rethinking about the protection of the family. Because as you said, families without men around can look somewhat different, but it might need to sort of get also deeper about unpacking some of the traditional things that may have happened. Because at the same time, I know that when I said I've got certain reservations about feminism, but I'm not entirely against the movement, but I feel like there's something better that can be done, which is why I'm more inclined to sort of be in support of womanism as opposed to feminism. But again, we can sort of unpack the role of feminism and womanism sort of in the family structure, and also how do we protect the family structure and take
100%,
more accountability in all those. Because I don't really want to sort of approach also this through just a single lens and speaking from a place of privilege, because at the same time we don't know what really remains at the heart of different dysfunctional families. So we might need to sort of think carefully also when we unpack those.
For sure.
Thank you both for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Are you masculine?
So
are you masculine? Let me use a very dirty language. You got balls to step onto a conversation. You didn't know how it was gonna go.
Oh, I feel very masculine for stepping on.
But
it was brave. Actually, I have to give a huge shout out to Leong, because it was short notice. I actually told it, was it yesterday?
Yesterday morning.
I was like, we're having this pod. So on short notice to come and bring insightful talk, I think is, I wouldn't say masculine, but it's, some
politically correct over here.
Right, and also thanks to you, Tony, for having us and for sharing this platform. I think a lot of the listeners and perhaps new guests to the show will glean a lot of lessons from this particular episode. And moving forward, I'd be very happy to come and speak on other issues that perhaps are affecting the youth, particularly here in Australia and across.
Both of you, let me know.
I also agree. I think it's great what you're doing. When we were talking about education and how individually people should be responsible, you're also doing what you can with your platform. Absolutely. And that's mentoring people, whether you're aware of it or not. And I think that's amazing. That's like what we need to do, and like steps that we need to take to, I guess, have fruitful conversations where people are aware of the most controversial and unpacking all of that.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Sure.
See you soon, Visions and Tones, and we are out. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.